Jelly Trumpet.
So our bonus track is Peter Freedman. We've had a lovely 12-minute, 12-question interview, which brought up a number of things. One of which I liked most of all, which I'd like to go back to, was when I asked Peter about which three things will more help him be more creative. And he pointed out three and then four. One being sleeping, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Walking, never to be underestimated. Making a cup of tea. I think when your brain is elsewhere, like for me, it's driving. I get quite a lot of ideas then. And then the paradox between having enough time and something that I'm quite keen on, which is time discipline and having deadlines. So Peter, would you like to take us up on that? Have you had any particular ideas you've been very proud of while walking? Do you get ideas every time you walk, or is it only occasionally?
Well, I can't think of good specific examples, but I just have been conscious over the years. I do go for a long walk every day, and I think it's helpful if you kind of spend a period of sustained and intense thinking about the subject at hand and the problem at hand, and then go for a walk. So the kind of the sustained and intense thinking is the preparation stage that really again is feeding your subconscious and putting meat in the meat grinder, which I keep referring to, although I'm actually a vegetarian. But and then going for a walk and then reaping the benefits because you're more relaxed and and there's there's a huge amount of evidence. Nietzsche said it most famously, but I think there's endless other examples of much more much greater thinkers than I am. Not to say I'm a great thinker, but much more eminent minds than mine coming up with good ideas while walking. And I think sleep is arguably as important, if not more important, because I think sleep is a way of accessing your subconscious. Preferably if it's primed by preparation and educating yourself about the subject. But the subconscious is the real engine of the process. And I think there are stories about, you probably know the stories about, it's told about both Thomas Edison and Salvador Dali, the same story. I don't know whether it's true of both of them, about how they used to think about the subject the problem they were trying to solve, and then they would try and get tired and they would sit in a chair or on a bed, but with some kind of ball bearings or something heavy or marbles in their hands.
Oh, yes.
And that they would supposedly wait till when they fell asleep, the ball bearings or marbles would fall out of their hand, and then they would be able to access that kind of window between waking and sleep, where they could then supposedly, I've never tried that, but anyway, I just think kind of the threshold between when you're sleeping and awake, when you're just falling asleep or just waking up, is often a very good
I think I think that's absolutely true for creators. I think you can induce it. I did a lot of mime and physical theatre, and I did a mask workshop once where you're induced into a character by the use of masks. I won't go into the detail of it at the moment, but it was very clear that your mind was in a different state of consciousness. And for me, when I write, for many years, and I've repeated this story, I used to play a particular song, which was the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony. And it has an intro, etc. And then these violins kick in. And for some reason, and I mean for many years, it must have been 6, 7, maybe 8 years, every time I put on that track, I would be induced into the writing state. And then it stopped working and I had to find other stuff. But I think that's very important.
That is very interesting. Yeah, well, music can be a great source of inspiration, obviously, as well. So yes, I think that's another.
I think and practice, Peter, because what you were telling us earlier in the interview is you do a huge amount of preparation.
Yes.
It's a very. Do you know the name Jean Perret?
I it sounds vaguely familiar, but a
Probably you
short
probably will
answer is
recognise it. Jean Perret was the head comedy
sure.
writer for head of the team.
No.
So I think you broke up a bit there, Peter.
Yeah.
Jean
Sorry.
Perret was the chief of the writers for Bob Hope.
Ah,
And
interesting.
you alluded in your interview to, as a youngster, listening to reading joke books and listening to comedians. And Jean Perret, there's two very interesting things. I think you can still buy it. It's called the Comedy Writing Workbook. I spent ages trying to track that down, and I got it on Amazon Marketplace once, and I still haven't finished the damn thing. But it's great. And there's
Yeah.
two things in there that he says, which I think is always relevant for creatives, and the connection you made between comedy and creativity. And that
Yeah.
is, one is the quota system. So he would, well, you normally say to someone, go off and come back with some ideas, they'll come up with 5 or 6. He would say, put 20, say 25, say 50, because it pushes you further and further.
Yes. No, I agree
And
with
the other
that.
thing he alluded to was something that I've done quite a lot, is just to build lists of quite diverse things, because he
Yes.
says, and I think the term he says is, it's comedy comes from rubbing two ideas together.
Yes, and well, creativity does as well. Yes, I mean they are to a large extent, not always, but they have an awful lot in common. Yes, they're very. Yeah, it's about making surprising and unusual connections between two things that are not normally connected. That's I think
Mm.
it's a good and with comedy it has to be funny. With creativity, it often is funny, but doesn't have to be. So yes,
No,
I
it just
think
has to be
that's
original.
true.
Have you ever read any of Edward de Bono books?
I went to a talk by him, and I know of his work, but I'm not sure whether I've read any of his books. I don't think I have, but yeah, I know about his work.
Because I was a big fan when I started out writing, because I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and how an ideas come about. And the one, he was famous, of course, for his book about lateral thinking and all manner of other stuff. The man's very, very bright. But there's one in particular I like, which is called The Six Thinking Hats. And so
Yes,
that's about the different forms of thinking, and they're color coded.
yeah,
You can literally, in schools, they'll sometimes do this. They'll have the 6 coloured hats and give them to a pupil, and the pupil has to take that form of thinking. Like, for example, with a blue hat on, it's big thinking, it's strategy thinking, blue sky
yes,
thinking. With green, it's creative. And
yes,
with, say, yellow, it's all about optimism. So that's a great thing about the thinking and the mind and the human, and how the different types of thinking there are, which just blew my mind when I first read it. One of the other things, I think, to finish off, that I'd like to pick up with you was, and it greatly surprised me, was the connection you made between machine learning, AI, and humans, and the difference. And you were of the opinion that one day it will be possible for machines to think creatively. Is that what you think?
Well, my son works for an AI company, so I learn about a lot about AI from him. But there is, well, I do not everybody agrees. There's widely different opinions, but one vision, which many people think, is that there will come a point where machines can do everything we can do, and you know, eventually can do it better. But yeah, but we're some way from that, and people disagree on how soon that will come. But I mean, um, currently they can't. Again, I went to a talk. Marcus de Soto, the mathematician and kind of public intellectual and scientist, he wrote a book about AI and creativity. And I went to a talk by him, and I think he was saying about how machines are very good at kind of mimicking. They can mimic and copy, but they can, you know, you can get a painting that's very closely in the style, and they could write in the style of a novelist or a comedian or something. But I say in a novel level, they're not really good at plots and the good big picture and everything yet. They can write, they can mimic the style of a particular writer very well. So anyway, it's a fast developing and fast changing area. So, and machines can do various creative tasks spookily well, but the other bigger, more important ones that they can't yet do. But
But
if it's
I think we're both safe, Peter, at the moment. You know, if you
well, for a while, but
well, I think
eventually.
for a long while. I think for a long while, if you look up anyone, if you Google about Google's AI project about writing poetry and read some of the poetry created by machine learning, then you'll be well ahead, and you'll be quite amused by that.
Yes,
But
well, I suppose as in many areas, I think the medium-term future will be human AI collaboration, and but then eventually the machine will take over.
A lot more clever people than me that can work out how a computer can be random, because that's a word in modern parlance where people say if it's off beat, like that's the term I use, then that's random. Because you have a non sequitur, for instance, that's a sort of like the obvious example of that.
But I think it can be systematically random as well. There are.
Yeah, you can do, I suppose, but then it's functional. Then there's no, it may be creative, but in terms of writing and what you're saying about plots, I don't see a machine, well, I suppose it's possible, anything's possible, isn't it? Having a personality that you want to read, to be able to create human characters where you anticipate what they're going to do, and that gives you humour, and that gives you affection towards a character. Everything's possible, I suppose, Peter, but I just don't see it happening for a long time.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope not.
I think we'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much again, Peter, for agreeing to be interviewed on Jelly Trumpet. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me.